On today's podcast, we're joined by Thaddeus Rudd, co-president of Mom+Pop Music. We discuss how his approach to signing and nurturing artists has evolved over the years, what qualities he looks for when identifying and nurturing emerging talent, how Mom+Pop differentiates itself from major labels in terms of its approach to artist development, and the main goals and aspirations he has for the label, and much, much more. You can't afford to miss it. Insiders, are you ready? Welcome to MUBUTV's Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage artists and music business professionals who are dedicated to having a successful career in the new music industry. Here are your hosts, Rich Ezra and Eric Knight.
Welcome back, Insiders, to another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast, where our mission is to educate, empower, and engage your music career. On today's podcast, we welcome Thaddeus Rudd, co-president of leading independent label Mom+Pop Music. We discuss the label's unique long-term vision for artists, their approach to artist development, the non-creative and often unspoken factors they look for in the acts that they sign, and the challenges that he sees on the horizon for independent labels, and much, much more. Welcome back, Insiders. Today's featured guest is Thaddeus Rudd, co-president of leading independent record label Mom+Pop Music. This was a very interesting conversation for a couple reasons. Thaddeus has been with the record label for a long time. It's run by a friend of mine, Michael Goldstone, who you know,
Legendary
Eric.
A&R guy.
Legendary A&R guy who signed Pearl Jam, who signed Rage Against the Machine, Mother Love Bone,
Right.
Has been involved, with many, many acts, also worked at DreamWorks for a long time before forming his own company over 15 years ago. And so what made this such an interesting conversation is, many of you, I don't know if you know, Mom+Pop Music is celebrating their 15th anniversary, which is quite a feat for an independent label in this day and age. And I thought one of the most interesting aspects of the conversation that we had with Thaddeus was how he talked about how the not only the label, but the industry was so different when they started 15 years ago versus today, in terms of evolving as a label. And also the whole A&R philosophy, that he had, coming from a major label where you put lots of money into, singles and marketing and front loading, and how, the whole A&R philosophy they wanted to change. They did not want to operate by that.
Right.
Which was totally different in 2000.
Right. Which it was still part of that old system. Now we come into a new system now where you can't front load things anymore. You can't just write a blank check and, things are going to hit. It's a very different world. So yeah, it's interesting, that whole process. Also, I thought his thoughts on whether new artists need to be more developed before they're signed than in previous eras.
Yeah, we've talked about that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's very true. They do, because in a world where you have so many artists and you have so much music, you can't, say, well, somebody will develop over 3 or 4 albums. A lot of times labels aren't willing to do that. There's too much out there. They don't have the time, the money, mostly the time. And that's where managers and the attitude of artists themselves needing to develop themselves earlier really comes into play a lot.
And with that, Insiders, sit back, relax, and enjoy our featured conversation with Thaddeus Rudd.
Thaddeus, welcome.
Thank you, Rich.
It's good to see you.
It's great to be here.
Your label, Mom+Pop, just celebrated its 15th anniversary last year. How have the expectations of a label partner evolved over the years as far as you're concerned?
I think everything has changed and evolved 2, 3, 4, 5 times since we started it. Goldie started it. I came a year later. The premise was providing an environment for artists to be creative, to have meaningful successes, and build long-term careers in a way that the major labels weren't really, invested in at that point in time in the late 2000s. So the first deliverable was artistic freedom, and also having a continued, executive presence that wasn't going to, be ousted by the next regime change and things like that, meaning being able to profess continuity and longevity in the partner. I think the things that we had to do back then were actually more difficult in ways for a label, like end caps at Best Buy, commercial radio, bricks on the iTunes store. It was much harder to sell music in some ways than in the environment we're in now, which has different challenges. I think over time, our job evolved, and part of it was acknowledging the growth of the digital space, certainly the streaming space. Later on, maybe called the second generation, there was like the SoundCloud generation, where artists were breaking on platforms that we didn't even, actively participate in or monetize at that time. And it was the beginning of sort of chasing, online virality by seeing what all sorts of kids and people around the world were listening to. So I think it kept, the ecosystem keeps evolving, and what's been a constant is finding artists that are worth investing in, artist careers that are exciting and growing, ascending, and finding ways to be a valuable partner. So, commercial radio is still part of what we do. Best by end caps are not, and everything else in between has sort of shifted. So I think that, it's no surprise that right now, in a streaming era and in a social media era and in a viral social era, artists can do far more on their own. And in some cases, artists don't need a label. I think I said earlier today, the reality is that there is a food chain, and the first part of that food chain is just providing distribution. Any artist can go to DistroKid or a similar pipeline that provides the basics, and any artist can begin their socials strategy and see what works. So I think that so much power has, in the developmental stage of a career, has shifted to the artist, and that's certainly a positive thing if you believe in democratization of music and access to career building, but it's also changed the role of what labels play in careers.
Thaddeus, thank you so much for joining us. This is Eric. It's really a pleasure to have you on the show. I wanted to ask you, could you elaborate on the evolving role of independent labels in today's music industry, especially in terms of the support and services provided to artists beyond just traditional distribution, which you were just speaking of?
I hate to speak for anybody else, and I'll say this. Mom+Pop continues to evolve. Every year, every 6 months, we're reapplying to be a dynamic partner that's addressing what the needs of our artists are and the artists that we want to work. I don't, labels, there are lots of different types of labels. We're, speaking for us, we're in a sweet spot where we have a large enough roster and a large enough team and a high level of career artists that we work with that ensure that all of us have access to the gatekeepers, and all of us have, relatively significant releases. So our experiences are informed by the projects we're releasing, the artists we're working with, and the gatekeepers that we're, routinely, partnering with, working with. So sure, we've evolved to embrace, the power of the socials, the power of the content that we and artists create, the importance of creating an organic listening, I'll call it streaming, but listening audience, the global nature of that audience. And that, just to give you a nugget or two, we might be hiring influencers instead of going to commercial radio, or doing the converse, depending on the record. We might be plugging in Australia and the UK on an artist, or we might just only worry about America, at that juncture. But everything's on the table. The size and scope of our company is large enough that we can release global projects. We just put out MGMT's first album in 6 years. It went great. It was a really positive experience for them, and I think I think we did a great global job of rolling that out with importance. We're about to put out a Porter Robinson album, which is fantastic. Where we have some new signings like Tiny Habits or Magdalena Bay, and we hope that we're able to service the many things they need, from creative to promotion to international to A&R and creative, help, making the actual music when needed.
Speaking of the A&R aspect, Thaddeus, what is Mom+Pop's approach to A&R and artist selection? I want to get into the specific kinds of criteria that you consider, you and Michael consider, when signing an artist. I think that goes to the heart of a label's culture, a label's philosophy, and what they will and won't get involved with. Can you speak to that?
Without speaking for Goldie, I'll say that Goldie has always been, a defender of artists, an artist advocate, a supporter of creative freedoms in systems called the major labels of past, where those things were not given. The foundation of Mom+Pop was creative freedom and independence, and but the corollary is the importance of an artist's vision. The better the artist knows themselves and the more they've accomplished or created their vision and realized their vision, rather, by the time we work together, the better we'll do generally. There are some artists like Courtney Barnett that will deliver a finished record, and at the same time, we're there if an artist of that nature needs help getting in touch with a producer or needs ideas. Goldie will often say, trust is earned, and you don't always sit with an artist in the first or second meeting when you're trying to sign them and tell them all the things that you can do for them and all the ideas you have for them and all the ways that you think that they should record their record. And that's why that vision is important. Artists have high degrees of control and high degrees of, the ability to execute independently right now. But as you earn trust and as you work together, you hope that your availability and your interest in being a resource, can be taken advantage of. And we're sometimes it's the second record that gets the collaboration. And also sometimes artists say, look, I want to know what you think of these 3 songs, for single contenders, because I'm sort of, I need the outside perspective. So there are lots of different ways to do A&R. We work a lot with encouraging collaborations. We really believe in the connectivity between artists that's organic and artistically founded, but also incredibly important in getting beyond a core audience and having reach. With streaming platforms, it's just how it works. It's great. You get 2 different release radar moments when you have another artist participate in your record. So there are lots of things that we do. I can't say there's like a 10 check marks that get you signed to Mom+Pop, but we all have our process, and we also know that the more exciting and the more development there is to that artist story by the time we get involved, the easier it is for us to excite gatekeepers that we are inevitably asking to jump in and do more, with the record that we're putting out.
Okay.
Thaddeus, Mom+Pop emphasizes creative control and artist empowerment, which I love. It's amazing. How do you balance the artist's vision with the label's objectives, particularly when it comes to building a career over the long term?
Well, we do partnerships. We always did. The old 50-50, punk rock deal was the foundation of our label. It's become the norm. It puts the 2 parties in a really equitable place. You're making decisions together. You're both participating. It's not a zero-sum game where the artist, where the label takes 85%, in a royalty deal. Thankfully, deal making is modernized, and that's become more common than not. A lot of artists have long-term vision, and their concern isn't just the streaming on this single. It's, will I be playing to the same 5,000 people at the Greek, in 5 years or 10 years? Or, I want to grow into arenas and I want to be an international, artist on X level. How do we make that happen while retaining my vision and doing it the way that feels authentic? That's generally the role that we're in, is helping artists grow while also doing what feels natural and intuitive. We don't take a touring percentage. For a brief period of time, labels did, and we resisted that urge. So we are a recorded music partner. We are in the business of streaming, so we are in the business of maxing that song out, maxing that record out. But hopefully, we're ambitious and aggressive on the recorded side in a way that's simpatico with building long-term audience at the same time. So it means, trusting artistic choices, not jamming artists to do things that are short-term, and not telling people what they have to do, because if you don't deliver and you're wrong, or the record doesn't happen and the artist feels like they, were told to do something and false that's not a great dynamic either. So, but no, we build for the long term.
One of the things we were speaking about earlier, that you had talked about is the fact that, today artists who want a career in music need to be more developed in the early stages. And I was wondering if you can speak to that, because to me that goes to the heart of what labels, Mom and Pop included, are willing or not willing to sign in terms of where an artist needs to be at on their own. And I think it's an important part in the A&R process. Can you speak to that with regards to acts out there today who are looking to build careers?
Well, artists have all the tools and they have all the power to make labels like us, court them and cajole them and compete to get to sign them. At the same time, they also have all the responsibility. In the generation where I came up in the business and my partner came up in the business, the labels had inordinate power to put songs on the radio or create demand. So is it a good thing that's been democratized? It probably is. But the flip side of that is, the cynical artist or manager saying, look, nobody wants to sign me because I don't have X happening, like, followers or posting results or streaming or whatever. And the reality is that it's very hard to generate hundreds of thousands of streams instantly, the way it was easier to sell 2,000 albums overnight with a really killer, late night with David Letterman performance or whatever. So it takes longer to build most of the time. But sometimes it builds very quickly. And that's where we get to virality, where things could take years to develop that million monthly listeners or that 2 million monthly listeners, or it could happen overnight. And when that happens, that's just because of the rules of viral sharing and creating those viral moments. And that happens to even non-viral artists. I mean, Mitski has one of the top 20 biggest Spotify songs in the world, and it's an amazing thing. It creates opportunities for the career, but it's not a substitute for building career. In fact, when viral moments happen, everybody's sort of on the clock to try to accomplish as much as possible with that momentum. And, I just like it back to back when you had that K-Rock ad, that mythical, we're added to K-Rock. You had 8 weeks to kind of, grow your story, make things real, sell in the market, put shows on sale, like show them how you were succeeding because you didn't want to get dropped. When there's virality or when there are moments now, it's an opportunity for all of us, including us as the label, to build out everything else so that there is a foundation and there is an actual audience, not just social media, people responding to the track and then ultimately not really buying into the rest of the artist, which is what happens to a great degree when songs go viral.
Thaddeus, I wanted to ask you, has the definition of what it means to be successful in the music industry evolved over the last decade, do you feel?
I think there have always been different successes. And if you speak to live promoters, they'll have a whole host of artists that are their most valuable artists. But there's no question that there's a much longer long tail, or at least a much fatter long tail. It's not a zero-sum game. There are more artists that are having high levels of streaming success, high levels of touring success, which is probably related to streaming and socials creating audience. So that's a really good thing. And if people bemoan the lack of superstars, that may be because we don't have a limited amount of radio and MTV and similar star-making slots. So there's more out there, but there's more out there. The numbers of artists that can sell 5,000 tickets has probably never been greater. The numbers of artists that have over 1 million or 2 million or 3 million monthly listeners on Spotify probably never been greater. So there might be fewer superstars, but there might be a lot more career artists. And unlike the old days when those artists were dropped because they were unrecouped on their record deals, maybe they could sell clubs, maybe they got their way to being theaters, but they were failures on the recorded level. In this era, you don't even need a recorded partner, meaning you can run a really, really great business without a recorded partner. It's just a different sort of business because there's less of what we do and more of the live thing, probably, more socials.
Yeah, it's so interesting hearing that from you, because a couple years ago, Jason Flom was on a panel here, and he talked about this very principle that you just spoke of, where he said, Jason is the head of Lava Records through Republic, and he said that was the approach that they took with Greta Van Fleet. he knew they never would have songs per se that would be hit singles, and they never did. In the traditional sense that you're speaking of. But what he felt would happen is that, and it did, they would build their following via live. That would become the most important component of breaking that act was live performance and building the work that they needed
from the
to
live
do.
end,
Yeah, from the live end, which, to your point is...
You could also reverse engineer it, though, and say that the streaming actually builds the live. Because for the first time, because of streaming, 60% of an artist's listening audience is outside of North America. A lot of it's in places they'll never play shows, Philippines, Indonesia, South America in a lot of cases. We just signed a band, just as one example in our little stable, a band called Tiny Habits.
Yep.
And they're from Berklee College of Music. They had some great tours with Noah Kahan and Gracie Abrams recently. They just sold out, the whole tour in America of larger clubs. And are doing the same in Europe. They sold out, a club in Melbourne, 600 people on the back of a Gracie Abrams tour, and a club in London called Heaven on the back of a Noah Kahan tour. But those are sold out because of their social audiences. Not even the streaming, just literally the TikTok audience and the fact that the music is out there streaming. They have a couple of big songs. They're able to sell tickets in places that in the old ecosystem would take artists, 2 years to even get there. So there's an instant audience, and the live audience is showing up because of what's happening online. That's a great thing. The live audience will grow as the records grow. I don't think that going from 600 people to 1,200 people to 2,400 people in London is going to mean that the streams are going to triple, because the math just doesn't work. It's more likely that the work we do with our recorded, releases and the work they do with their socials is going to reach thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of kids, and some of them will become fans, and some of them will buy tickets when they show up in town. And that's kind of how I see the interplay between the touring side of it and the streaming and the social side, where we have the whole world as our market. The live experience is going to be reserved for a much smaller subset, and that's the audience that an artist is going to have to live with and really, pay attention to on a more granular level.
I want to talk about an aspect of Mom+Pop specifically, which is that you have a notably low turnover rate among your staff, and I'm just curious, how has the label been able to cultivate such a supportive and empowering work environment? And the other part of that is, has that had a positive impact on your roster?
Well, we're a family-owned business. My partner and my, self-own it. So we enjoy the people we work with. We tend to grow employees from a position to a better position to a higher position. And, we've taken a lot of people from first jobs to kind of, third, fourth, promotions. I tend to hire people we like, and we think, live the culture, love what they do conceptually, hopefully love the roster as much as we do, and really identify with the type of work they do. We, during COVID, we did our best to help people adapt to the extraordinary pressures. And some of those adaptations, we've maintained. So we're in the office certain days, and people are allowed to work from home other days. People have turned out to really like that flexibility. We've all learned that having a little bit of alone time in the workday is a great counterbalance to being in a chaotic, or at least a fully staffed office, without an open floor plan with a lot of stuff going on. And at the same time, those days in the office are incredibly important to teamwork and communication and camaraderie. We have a flat reporting structure. There aren't a lot of layers of management at all. So Goldie and I have, we'll call them direct reports, and it's a lot of people. And that's great, because for better or for worse, we all work together, regardless of how old we are, how long we've been at the company. Everybody has a unique role, and hopefully that contributes to retention. And also people hopefully like what they do, and are able to do it in a bigger platform as they continue working on Mom+Pop.
Thaddeus, how does Mom+Pop differentiate itself from major labels in terms of its approach to artists and their development, particularly for artists that are transitioning from major labels to independent labels? MGMT was a specific case of this transition. Be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I would say, first of all, that there are many different options for artists, and for some people at the stage of the career, a distribution relationship is the perfect way to go about it. And we think our approach is successful. Major labels certainly have a place and can be a great fit, and certainly the deals are different. We sort of embraced 50-50 partnerships. We don't have a distributor. We self-distribute ourselves globally because we're Merlin members, so we're retaining all the at source revenues, which is important. We were able to hopefully have far better back end participation for our artists. On a experience level, that's part of it. Knowing that you're fairly compensated and you have a great deal and a deal that you don't regret later. But we're 25 people and we're built to be really present and to super serve the projects. We do 10, 12, 15 albums a year. We have a roster of 25 artists. There are no priorities or non-priorities, and we devote a lot of time to everything we sign. So the artist experience, is not one of saying, well, we just can't get the president on the phone, or after we signed, we never really had access to those people. Every artist and manager have access to the people in the departments that they need, and Goldie and myself are available. I think that for MGMT, part of it was having a high amount of communication and collaboration and idea sharing in terms of how to roll out, how to pick singles, how to treat individual markets in Europe, and a lot of these arcane things that maybe there wasn't as much time to deal with. On a creative level, we try to let artists be artists, and we were there to support that vision, to fund that vision, but and we had a lot of time to talk about ideas. So we also care. When you're one of 12 releases a year, not one of 48, there's a different attention economy, and I think we're really good at, because we do care, and we live the culture of what we commit to and who we release.
You brought up something just now in talking about that I want to follow up with you on, which is, and you had mentioned it in a previous answer, which is the international market. I think your quote was that 60% of the listening audience now is outside the United States. Since you've joined Mom+Pop, how have the international markets become more significant for your business?
So many ways. First of all, we signed Flume, we signed Courtney Burnett, we signed Tash Sultana from Australia, we signed Alice Merton from Germany, we signed FKJ from France, and now Philippines. So Heinz from Spain. We've always embraced the world. And Goldie has an anecdote where he was at a former major label, and he was told, no, don't go chase that artist in Australia. We have an office there. If they're any good, they'll sign them, or things like that, where you're put in a territorial box. One of the great things from day one was being able to look at the entire world as artists we could interact with and help. With streaming, it's made it easier because we are all one ecosystem to a degree. The playlisting in America is an important component that most other territories don't have access to. And we've learned to put targeted campaigns in foreign markets on, and we've developed a much more fine-tuned approach where we might be plugging the UK and Australia. We might be going to radio in Germany and France because we have a breaking pop record by Ash. There are different circumstances, and you might have established artists like Courtney Burnett or MGMT, where you're activating 5-6 territories, and because of the beautiful complexity of Europe, you've got different languages. So each territory is its own world, and you might need a plugger, you might need a publicist. You certainly have a different tour promoter often in those markets. So we have a very thoughtful and granular approach to foreign markets. But between Latin America, Southeast Asia, excluding Japan, which is its own ecosystem, Australia, and then the UK and Europe, we have different kind of territorial captains that run those campaigns with our New York and LA based marketing staff. It's also again post-COVID, it's never been easier to run global relationships, and I think what a lot of majors and other indies have also found is that by deferring everything outside of America to an office in London isn't really a great approach. and the ability to run international campaigns with plugging and promo and marketing and live promoter partners in other territories can be done easily from America, just as easily from America as it can from a satellite office in London. And we're completely invested in our records at home, so the ability to over-invest and sort of over-deliver in those territories is easier when you're running the world. So, a lot of Zooms basically, but it's great. You get to see your partners. They appreciate talking to the home office, as it were. It's a better relationship in a lot of cases than talking to somebody else who's the quote-unquote international person in London, and they're just kind of there to run the records for the home territory.
Let me ask you, in your life, have there been any books or films that have really resonated with you, professionally speaking, that you've loved over the years that you could recommend to our audience?
I've really enjoyed reading biographies of people that I respected.
Okay.
Any come to mind?
I read Chris Blackwell's book.
Yes.
I read a book by one of the founders of like Demon Records recently, and I'll read Dave Robinson's stories about starting Stiff, and it's very interesting. I read Seymour Stein's book, which was wonderful.
Did you read Richard Russell's book?
No.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah.
So it's inspiring, but it's tough because it's such a different world. And in a way, because I came up in the early 90s, and it was like the last vestiges of major label, like
strangleholds,
bliss. And the world I came up in was very hard to access, and it was also, it was the end of the best of times. So maybe I'm nostalgic, or it's really fun to read about how people created things in the 60s and 70s and 80s. But I have to, I guess hedge that by admitting that none of that would work now. There are totally different rules, and if you want to go be an entrepreneur or a startup, success, you have to work in your current rules, and you probably need to kind of reinvent, what you believe pretty frequently. So it's I think the parallels for us of starting a label in a very difficult climate and transitioning to streaming. I don't know. I read a Howard Schultz book about Starbucks, whether you like Starbucks or not, and I'm indifferent on it. It was interesting to see that he kind of looked at himself as taking over an average middling coffee business, and sort of, he fixed it a little bit, I guess. I think that we're having to constantly analyze what we're doing and how we're doing it. And, unfortunately, the music industry books aren't really about that. I also think that in the old era, it was easier to kind of stumble into artists. It happens from time to time. I have a great anecdote in my life about how I happened to be at MUBUTV, and I had, a wonderful dinner with this person, this great guy in France, and he rang me up the next week and said, "You've got to listen to Alice Merton." And I flew over to Germany, assigned Alice Merton. We had a big hit. We love Alice. It was fun. And the lesson I've learned is don't be afraid to travel. Don't be afraid to meet people when you don't even have an end game or something you want from them. And sometimes that'll pay off. On the other hand, don't be afraid to get on the internet for 2 hours every morning and listen to lots of songs, and you might bump into Flume. So it's not always as simple as just bumping into somebody at a club or seeing U2 and, just happening to sign it, in the case of Chris Blackwell, because some kid at your label was jumping up and down and you didn't really care about it, and it becomes the most important artist, in the history of your company, save maybe Bob Marley. So it's fun to read stories, and it's fun to kind of consider people's experiences that have done meaningful things. I also have enjoyed a lot of artist books that have been really, really interesting just on a personal level.
Thaddeus, what advice would you offer artists who are serious about pursuing a career in today's music business?
Put out music. I mean, in this day and age, it's not that complicated. You have to make music, and that might mean working with co-writers and producers and all that stuff, but however you make the music, and then you have to figure out how to release it. And I'm not the best person to speak to TikTok strategy and Reels strategy and making short form content, But, any 14-year-old kid knows what you need to do. And I couldn't see very many ways around that. And there are always exceptions of, a band that puts out a song and it just happens. But it's a different skill set than maybe 5 years ago. So, I'm not one to give out advice, but, other than just do it and don't find a way to embrace, understand, appreciate, respect, and honor, what has to be done on socials and the way that music has to be shared, and find a way to do it authentically so that you don't regret it and you don't start disowning your own music or the process of releasing your own music. The demands on artists to generate content, aside from the recorded music, are intense. And I have sympathy, or empathy rather, for the amount of work that entails. But at the same time, it's, being an artist is a difficult road, and most artists are artists because it's a calling, And it's also okay to not want to be massive. People have different outcomes and different ambitions. But if we're talking about scaling the music industry or scaling a significant career, it's probably important to find ways to authentically create the content that's necessary to put out frequently, so that you don't really hate what you have to do, because it's probably going to be, a sustaining practice. Put it this way. Every other morning I run 3 miles. I kind of enjoy it. I think I enjoy it afterwards. I enjoy the feeling of it. I enjoy the benefits of it. I don't know if I really enjoy doing it at 6 a.m, but I do it every other day because I want the benefits of it. Maybe it's the same thing.
Well, it's important enough to you to do it. It's, it's what you're committed to.
Well, I feel comfortable why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And I believe in the benefits, and I know it's not detrimental to me. So if you replace TikToking with running, that's probably how I would approach it if I was ever in that position. But thankfully, I have no musical talent whatsoever, so it'll never happen.
Thaddeus, we want to thank you so much for doing this. We really
so
appreciate it. Very much so. Really. Thank you.
Anytime. Thanks.
Wow. What a great conversation. I've really looked forward to this with Thaddeus, because Mom+Pop Music is a label that I have long admired for the reasons that, you guys obviously can see. They have lasted 15 years, in listening to the conversation that we just had with Thaddeus, you can understand why they've lasted. Some of the things that I thought were so interesting in his conversation was when he spoke about balancing the individual needs and marketing plans, how everything is precisely tailored for each act. The way he spoke about, you don't treat a, beginning artist in the same way that you would, a
more
major
established act.
Yeah, like MGMT, I think is one of the major label acts that they have that transitioned out of the major label system and came to them. That's a whole different kind of marketing plan than perhaps for a brand new artist. I mean, that may sound obvious, but a lot of labels just, they have an
cookie cutter approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas you got from his the conversation with Thaddeus that they don't approach talent or marketing that way at all.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the other points was the very low turnover of their staff says a lot about how they run their label.
Absolutely. That's rare when you have people who have been at a company for an extremely long time, where the turnover is very, very, very low. I mean, major independent management companies, that's not something that you see very often in the business today. It's something rare, and I think it speaks to the integrity and to the corporate culture that Michael and Thaddeus have created for the label.
And the passion that they have. So
yeah, and you'd have to have passion to do what they've done over the last 15 years. To run a label in this kind of market for that, it really says something about them.
Hey, Insiders, thanks so much for tuning into this episode. We really appreciate it. To get show notes, links, and everything that was mentioned during this interview, head on over to our official website at MUBUTV.com/podcast/show notes. If you're enjoying the content and what we're doing here on the show, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts from. And don't forget to rate and review our show at iTunes. 5-star reviews are always welcome and help to ensure that our podcast stands out on the top-rated and new and noteworthy charts on iTunes and our space. You can also find us at social media at Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter X, all ending with the handle MUBUTV, which is spelled MUBUTV. Don't forget to catch our flagship show, the MUBUTV Music Business Insider video series, airing every week on YouTube at youtube.com/MUBUTV. This show was produced and created by Rich Ezra and Eric Knight. Theme music by Disciples of Babylon, and be sure to tune in next week for another episode of the MUBUTV Music Business Insider Podcast.